Hi, this is John Buckner with Farm Journal Media. We're at the field day for the Forage Systems Research Center in Illinois, Missouri, which is north central Missouri. And this is an experiment station for the University of Missouri in Columbia. And I've got with me today Mr. John Lory, and he's the State Nutrient Management Specialist at the University of Missouri. And I corralled John and asked him to give us a little kind of rundown on, after this drought period, what farmers could expect for fertilizer recommendations for the coming planting year.
Yeah, thank you. We've been looking at if you grew a corn crop, we had very high levels of drought-affected corn this year, and how does that reduced corn yield affect what your fertilizer recommendation should be for next year? We've seen a lot of different kinds of management happen in cornfields. Some folks just take off the reduced grain yield. Some folks went out fairly soon after they realized they weren't going to get much of a corn crop, and they green chopped the corn and fed it to animals. And we have other folks that have taken grain and then taken off stalks afterwards. And so we've got all kinds of different things going on out there. And the question is, is there any benefit to the fact that we didn't get a full corn yield this year to how much of a fertilizer we need to put down next year? The reality is corn takes up nutrients at different rates of speed through the year. This year we really ran out of water right about the R1 phase, beginning of reproductive phase. At that time, about half the dry matter has been accumulated by the plant. About 70% of the nitrogen is on board the plant at that time, and already 90% of that potassium that the plant's going to take up is on board. If we had gone through and harvested the plant for a full grain crop, we would have removed about the same amount, about 70% of the nitrogen in the crop, about the same amount of N as is in the corn plant at about R1. So if you were growing corn, it got up to that level, and you end up removing the whole plant, you're taking off as much nitrogen as if you had harvested just the grain at the end of the season. With potassium, it's pretty interesting because remember, early in the season is when most of the potassium is taken onto the plant. It has 90% on board early in the season, yet you only take about 20% of the potassium off with the corn grain. So if you harvest green chopped corn, or if you took off corn stalks, you could easily be taking off more potassium than you would have taken off with a conventional harvested grain crop. So the reality is that we have farmers out there who have a wide range of situations. Farmers who got little yield and did not only took off a bit of grain, there's going to be quite a bit of residual nutrients in the soil left over from the previous year. But most farmers I've talked to are somehow trying to get some value, particularly in a year with low amounts of forage. They're trying to get the stalks off so they can use them for an emergency feed. When you remove those stalks in these years, you're taking off quite a few nutrients, so that value to your crop may be quite a bit less. So my advice to farmers is to think through what did you really take off there and make decisions accordingly. The last thing I'll just raise is that if you have a low yield and didn't take off much nitrogen, most of your nitrogen will be still in the field, and it's made it through the summer. It's there this fall. Whether it'll be there for next year's crop really is going to depend on what kind of winter we have. If we have a real wet year, we can still move some nitrogen. So we do have tests you can use, the soil nitrogen test, to test that in the spring.
John, have you talked to many farmers that are planting, say, wheat or cover crops of some type to handle some of that nitrogen and make it available for the next year, to tie it up for next year so it's not leached?
Yes, well, cover crops certainly have the benefit. They are able to pull up nitrogen and hold it more carefully in the soil. And this year, because the soil profiles are so dry, it's going to take an exceptional amount of rain to fill our profile up and then move on and move nitrogen down out of the root zone. So.
Thank you, John. This has been John Buckner for Farm Journal Media.